Hello, everybody. My name is Zhang. I am currently a research scientist at TikTok. Today, I'll present our paper exploring expandable grid designs to make iOS app privacy labels more usable. So this study was mostly designed while I was a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University. This work is in collaboration with Lily, Kyerra, Norma, and Lorrie, and a lot of them actually present today. All right, so notice and consent have been the foundational principles in privacy and data protection for decades. Notice is typically addressed through the publication of a privacy policy. And as the audience is probably familiar, there are a lot of issues with privacy policies. In practice, users rarely read them, and they're not only just long and difficult to read, but full of jargons, and they also tend to be ambiguous or silent about important issues. So the concept of privacy nutrition labels were first introduced by Kelly and colleagues. It was actually published and presented at SOUPS 2009, 15 years ago. So these privacy nutrition labels offer a standardized and succinct way of informing people about data collection and use practices, focusing on a small set of issues that matter to most users. So in December 2020, Apple introduced their app privacy labels inside the App Store. And Google's Play Store also followed suit and rolled out their data safety sections in April 2022. These labels are reminiscent of the privacy nutrition labels introduced and evaluated in research over a decade earlier. So since these labels were out, researchers have been studying them in the wild, including their usability, their longitudinal changes over time, how to better help developers create these labels, their compliance, whether what's declared on the labels actually what's happening inside the code, and also comparing Apple's labels with Google's labels. And there are a variety of different topics. All right, so please let me quickly introduce some background on the iOS app privacy labels. So in the App Store, you actually need to go to the specific app page to see the compact view privacy label. So after scrolling past some stats, descriptions, screenshots, reviews, you see an app privacy label section. So they could be up to 3 cards. There are data used to track you, data linked to you, and data not linked to you. And under each of these sections are the data types associated. So at the time of the making, there actually could be up to 14 data types. But the labels are still developing. There are new changes that I checked yesterday. And there is a See Detailed button on the top right corner. So when you click it, it shows the full app privacy label. So when you actually see the cards, so data used to track you, followed by the data types and subcategories. And for data linked to you, you see a list of purposes, developers, advertising, marketing, analytics as headers. And underneath headers, there are data types and sub-data categories associated with that purpose. And this is only the data linked to you section. And the data not linked to the section follows the same structure. So as you can see, so an interview study on the usability of the iOS labels published in past 2022 showed that there are a lot of issues with Apple's existing labels and provided some preliminary directions for improvement. And one of is the need for a better structure. So participants were confused about the 2-dimensional data being flattened in a long list. And they thought a lot of the information was repetitive since the same data types were showing, but under different purposes. But they saw the same data types and thought, OK, why am I seeing this information over and over again? And another direction is to make the labels interactive. A lot of participants tried to interact with labels, but were disappointed to find out there was nothing they can do to actually interact with the labels. Apple actually changed it, so now there's a little interaction to it since that paper. All right, so we tried to design a new label that could address some of the issues that I discussed. So we used a grid design for the 2-dimensional data purpose and data type. So we actually treat data used to track you as a purpose because it's more aligned. If you read the definition of tracking by Apple, it's actually more aligned as a purpose. And then we use color as the 3rd dimension to distinguish data linked to you versus data not linked to you, which are 2 non-overlapping attributes of the data. And we use reddish colors for data linked to the user and bluish colors for data not linked. We then further use the different shades of the color to distinguish whether it is all of the data or only some of the data. And we use the gray square for to indicate node collection. So due to the hierarchical nature of the data types and its subcategories, we incorporate row expansion. So you only see the top category. So upon expanding, you see the full list of subcategories. All right, so grid design plus expandable rows. So for those of you who are familiar, you probably realize this is the expandable grid design, which have been evaluated in various privacy and security contexts in prior research, but with mixed results. So they are shown to be well suited for Windows files permission control, but less effective for P3P policies. So note that in the original expandable grid, color was also used. So yellow indicates a cue for expanding the row, as it indicates no clear consensus for allow nor deny. So similarly, in our treatment design, the lighter color also served as the cue for expansion. So another major direction to make the label is to make it more interactive and make information more accessible. So besides the row expansion as interactive elements, we used information icons to make the definitions more accessible. So previously, Apple has a link to a full list of definitions for each terms. And in that interview design, nearly no participant clicked on the link to find out the actual definitions. And then we also included an interactive link to quickly assess the legend, since the legend cannot be fit into the same screen as the label. So we added something that can quickly direct the participants to the legend. And lastly, the person can also tap the cells to tell them about which data type, purpose, and the number of subcategories involved. So we made the treatment labels for two popular apps, Venmo and Candy Crush, based on their actual privacy label information in the App Store. They represent different types of privacy labels. So for example, Venmo has data linked and not linked to you sections. So therefore, you see the two colors, blue and red. And Candy Crush has only data linked to you, so you only see one color. But Candy Crush has the data used to track you section. Now it becomes a column on the rightmost. And so now we have the new expandable grid design. We want to empirically evaluate whether the design is better or not. So for the evaluation metrics, we consider comprehension and speed. So for comprehension, we want to see whether more questions were answered correctly by the participants. And for speed, it basically is whether it takes less time for them to answer these questions. And the questions were are related to the information being presented in the current labels. For example, about the different data types, about the purposes, or whether data is linked or not. All right, so we followed a between subject study design. So we first conducted pilot studies and power analysis to make sure that we had enough participants. And then we recruit prolific participants who are lay iPhone users from the United States. They're randomly placed into either the control or the treatment. The control would see the original iOS privacy labels, and the treatment would see the expandable grid design. So both conditions would answer the survey on their computers while interacting with the labels on their phones. And the labels were web pages simulating the iOS App Store. So we use JavaScript to record interactions and time spent at each steps. We removed 15 low-quality responses. The final data set contains 200 participants split equally between two conditions. All right, so our empirical results show that our expandable grid design is indeed more usable in terms of the two metrics that we talked about. So for our treatment, cuts the average error in half. So there are 12 questions in total. So the treatment, the average error count is 5, and for the control, the average count is 5, and for treatment is 2.7. And for the average time spent, the treatment took average 30% less time to complete. So both are statistically significant with a large effect size. So we also look at individual questions and their accuracy and time spent. I don't have time to go into details here, so this is only a teaser. I encourage you to read the paper for more details. And let's look at one question as an example. Does this app collect data for analytics purposes? And if so, what data? So if this were the control label, you actually need to click on the See Details and go through the entire, both the data linked to you and data not linked to you section, and find a header of analytics, and select all the data under that header. So there are two sections here. For the treatment, you basically look at the column indicated for analytics purposes and find all the squares that have colors. And let's look at another example. Does this app collect location data for third-party advertising purpose? And the correct answer is no. For the control label, you need to go through the entire, all the screens to figure out is actually not the case. But for the treatment, you basically just see there's a gray square, and you know no data is being collected. But of course, it seems like the treatment is doing great, but it also has its own issues. Let's look at the same question for the other app. So it's still the same question, and the actual correct answer is, so there are 4 choices. So it only collects only coarse or only precise, collects both, or neither. So as you can see, this salmon color indicates that only some data is being collected, but you wouldn't know whether it's coarse location or precise location until you actually expand the rows. And so there's no way of knowing without expansion. And this is actually the only question that the treatment takes longer than the control, and it's also the first question that they need to expand the row to answer. So we also get a lower accuracy in this question for the treatment and control. All right, let's look at some error analysis. So there are some common errors, for example, the confusing and ambiguous terminologies. For example, data types, it has context and context information. For purpose, as developer and advertising and third-party advertising. So participants mix up these terms and provided answers based on the wrong term. And for the control, the most issue is incomplete answers, because the control takes a lot of scrolling, and the correct answers are sometimes split between different sections. And there's actually one question where 0 control participant got it correctly. And for treatment, row expansion, as with other expandable grid designs, remains an issue. And also, there's some color confusion, whether it's the color blue versus red, or the shades of the color. Also provided some confusion. And on how to improve the treatment, basically address all the issues that I talked about, and address accessibility concerns, since we are actually using contrasting colors and different shades of colors, and accessibility remains a concern. So further research could explore color and plus either stripe patterns or dot patterns to augment the color alone. All right, so I want to summarize what made the treatment effective. So showing all the information on one screen without scrolling really decreased incomplete answers. Because the treatment is compact and showing everything in one screen, instead of the control, there's a lot of scrolling and clicking. And then the interactive elements provide needed information that's actually used by 91% of the participants. And then lastly, the grid made it easy for people to spot when a data collection practice was actually not there. All right, so time for questions.